So have you ever been in a situation where you had, like, all the facts?
Yeah.
You know, the perfect, airtight, beautifully constructed, just utterly logical argument.
Oh.
And you completely failed to change someone's mind.
Oh, yeah. Constantly. It's so frustrating.
Right. Picture it. You're sitting in a conference room or, maybe across the kitchen table. You have the data, the historical precedent, the spreadsheets, meticulously color-coded.
Naturally.
Exactly. You lay the entire architecture of your argument out perfectly. And the person across from you simply leans back, crosses their arms, and says, no, I don't see it that way.
Which just makes your blood boil.
It really does. But then, like 10 minutes later, someone else walks into the room, tells this highly emotional anecdotal story with, frankly, terrible underlying logic and absolutely zero empirical evidence to back it up. And suddenly, everyone is nodding along. They are entirely convinced.
Yeah. It is arguably one of the most universally maddening human experiences. You sit there looking at your spreadsheets, genuinely wondering if you are hallucinating.
Just you're like, am I crazy?
Right. You ask yourself, did nobody else just see the math? Is everyone else malfunctioning? But, the reality is this dynamic dictates the world. It governs high-stakes political discourse. It decides the outcome of multi-million-dollar corporate mergers. And it definitely dictates whether you or your partner wins the argument over where to go for dinner.
Oh, absolutely.
We operate under this persistent delusion that the bad argument automatically wins. But the best argument and the most persuasive argument are, well, they're fundamentally different entities.
And I want to really unpack that distinction today in our deep dive.
Yeah.
Because for anyone listening, understanding why that emotional story beat your pristine logic is really the key to unlocking how human beings actually operate.
It's essential.
So today, we are taking a deep dive into the underlying architecture of persuasion. We're going to bridge the gap between ancient rhetorical philosophy, cutting-edge neurobiology, and behavioral economics to figure out what is actually happening inside our brains when we decide to say yes.
I love it. And to do that effectively, we need to draw a very hard, very clear line right at the outset regarding what we're actually discussing. We have to separate genuine persuasion from manipulation.
Right, because those get conflated all the time.
Exactly. In popular culture, those terms are used interchangeably, which creates a lot of confusion. Manipulation relies on actively bypassing a person's judgment.
Bypassing it, okay.
Yeah, it functions by exploiting cognitive blind spots, creating manufactured urgency, or utilizing deceptive framing to corral someone into a decision they would, actively reject if they had a clear view of the board. It is inherently coercive.
So it's essentially a psychological sleight of hand. You're trying to sneak past their critical thinking.
Precisely the opposite of genuine persuasion. Persuasion is the process of actively engaging someone's judgment. You are providing accurate, contextualized information. You're doing the difficult work of building trust. And most crucially, you're establishing a clear bridge between your argument and the other person's pre-existing values. You aren't blinding them to reality. You're providing them with a new lens through which to view it.
So they can reach a new conclusion through their own internal reasoning process.
Exactly that.
I like to frame this entire dynamic using the anatomy of a car. If we look at logic, facts, data, empirical evidence, those make up the steering wheel. They provide the necessary direction. They keep the vehicle on the road. They ensure you arrive at the correct, objectively true destination.
I like this analogy.
But emotion is the engine. You can possess the most exquisitely engineered, perfectly calibrated steering wheel in the history of automotive design. But if there's no engine under the hood, that vehicle is not moving a single inch.
It's just sitting in the driveway.
Exactly. So today, we are popping the hood to look at the engine.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it. And to really look at that engine, we first have to deconstruct a massive culturally ingrained lie that we constantly tell ourselves.
A lie that we're logical.
Yes. The lie is this. We are primarily rational, calculating creatures who occasionally experience a glitch in our software called emotion. We view emotion as an impediment to clear thinking.
Which is how everyone prefers to view themselves, right? Nobody walks into a negotiation thinking, I'm going to be the irrational, emotional one today. We all believe we are the most objective person in the room.
We really do. But the neurobiological reality is the exact inverse of our self-perception. We are profoundly emotional, deeply social creatures who occasionally utilize logic to retroactively justify decisions that our subconscious already made.
On completely different experiential ground.
Yes, exactly.
What's amazing is that humanity actually had this figured out millennia before we had functional MRI machines to prove it.
Yeah.
If you look back roughly 2,500 years ago, Aristotle codified the 3 modes of rhetorical appeal.
He was way ahead of his time.
Way ahead. He argued that to move an audience, you needed ethos, which is the credibility and character of the speaker. You needed pathos, the emotional resonance of the message. And you needed logos, the logical architecture of the argument.
Right, the steering wheel.
Yeah. He understood that a purely logical argument, devoid of character and emotion, would just fall flat. And today, modern neuroscientists are essentially walking out of their labs, holding brain scans and saying, the ancient Greek philosopher was entirely correct.
It's incredible. And the modern science adds a layer of literal biological necessity to Aristotle's theory that is just fascinating. The connection between emotion and logical decision-making isn't just a psychological concept. It is hardwired into our neural pathways.
Oh, wow.
To understand this, we really have to look at the somatic marker hypothesis, which was heavily researched by neuroscientist Antonio Damasio.
Okay, I've heard of Damasio.
Yeah, he's brilliant. Damasio spent years studying patients who had suffered highly specific trauma to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is the region of the brain where emotion is processed and integrated with cognition.
So just to be clear, for you listening, for these specific patients, their raw intelligence, their memory, their ability to perform complex mathematics, all of that remained totally unaffected by the damage.
Completely pristine. If you handed them a complex logic puzzle or like an IQ test, they would score perfectly. Their executive function and analytical reasoning were entirely intact.
Wow.
But Damasio discovered a profound paradox. These individuals were virtually paralyzed when it came to making decisions in their actual lives. And I mean incredibly trivial decisions.
Like what?
Like choosing a restaurant for lunch, or deciding whether to schedule their next doctor's appointment for a Tuesday or a Wednesday.
Well, wait, if their analytical reasoning is intact, why couldn't they just look at their schedule, see an empty slot on Tuesday at 2:02 p.m., and logically conclude that they should take that appointment?
Because of what Damasio called the lack of somatic markers.
Somatic marker?
Yeah. A somatic marker is essentially a physical feeling, a gut instinct, a subtle bodily sensation of anticipation or dread that our brain attaches to different options based on past experiences.
Oh, I see.
Right? When you or I look at 2 options, we don't just logically weigh them. We instantly feel a subtle preference for one over the other. Damasio's patients couldn't generate those physical feelings.
So they're just looking at raw data with no preference.
Exactly. So when asked to choose between Tuesday and Wednesday, their brains would enter an infinite loop of analysis paralysis. They would map out the weather forecast for both days, analyze the traffic patterns, weigh their potential fatigue levels.
Oh my gosh, that sounds exhausting.
It really is. But because they couldn't feel any intrinsic value in one outcome over the other, they couldn't pull the trigger. Decision-making requires valuing. Valuing requires feeling.
Wow.
Without the emotional engine, the logical steering wheel just spins wildly in a circle.
That completely flips our traditional understanding of logic on its head. Emotion is not an obstacle to a rational decision. It is a biological prerequisite for a decision to occur at all.
Precisely.
Which directly explains something that has always fascinated me.
Mm.
Why storytelling absolutely annihilates raw statistics in almost every single persuasive context.
Yes. The power of narrative isn't just about entertainment, it's about cognitive infiltration.
Cognitive infiltration, I like that.
When a person is presented with a spreadsheet or a list of bullet points, their brain operates in an analytical mode. They are evaluating the data, looking for flaws, remaining skeptical. But when that same person is drawn into a narrative, a phenomenon researchers call narrative transportation, their brain chemistry literally changes.
The concept of neural coupling comes to mind here, right?
Exactly.
We've seen functional MRI studies where when someone is telling a highly engaging, emotionally resonant story, the brainwaves of the listener actually begin to mirror and synchronize with the brainwaves of the storyteller.
It's wild to see on a scan.
It really is. It acts like a biological Bluetooth pairing. The listener's brain lights up in the exact same regions as the speaker's brain.
And as that synchronization occurs, the listener's analytical, skeptical defenses naturally lower. They stop evaluating the incoming information as a set of claims to be verified, and they begin experiencing the information alongside the characters in the story.
So they're living it.
Exactly. Whatever beliefs, values, or arguments are embedded within that narrative essentially bypass the conscious guards at the gate and are deposited directly into the listener's experiential memory.
Which brings us to the behavioral economics of this, specifically the identifiable victim effect. Paul Slovic at the University of Oregon ran some incredible experiments on this regarding charitable giving.
Yes, this is a classic study.
He wanted to see what actually motivates people to open their wallets and donate money to a cause. And he found that people were highly motivated and deeply generous when presented with the story of a single, named, explicitly identified child who was suffering from hunger. But when he took that exact same child's story and added statistical context, saying this child is one of 3 million children currently suffering from this famine in this region, the amount of money people were willing to donate actually plummeted.
Which is so counterintuitive.
By adding more victims to the plea, he decreased the empathy response. And I have to admit, when I first learned about psychophysical numbing and that specific experiment, it felt incredibly cynical.
It does feel that way at first glance.
It makes human beings sound fundamentally flawed. Because logically, an epidemic affecting millions of people is an exponentially bigger crisis than a situation affecting one person. Why would our brains actively reject the larger, objectively more important problem and focus intensely on the micro problem?
It is deeply counterintuitive until you contextualize it within our evolutionary history. Our cognitive architecture did not evolve in a globally connected, hyper-informed society. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans existed in small, localized, tribal groups. We were biologically optimized to recognize and respond to the immediate suffering of the individuals directly in front of us. We simply do not have the neural hardware to genuinely comprehend, let alone emotionally process, the abstract suffering of millions of faceless people halfway across the globe.
It's the concept of Dunbar's number, right?
Okay.
Our brains are only built to maintain a limited number of stable social relationships. Anything beyond that becomes an abstraction.
Precisely. So when you present someone with a statistic like 3 million people are starving,
Right.
you aren't triggering their empathy, you are triggering their analytical processing center. And more importantly, you are triggering a profound sense of overwhelm. When human beings feel overwhelmed and fundamentally powerless to solve a massive systemic issue, our biological defense mechanism is to shut down and turn away.
We just block it out.
Right. But when you present them with one name, one face, and one story, you activate the emotional experiential processing center. The problem suddenly feels solvable. You can wrap your arms around one person's story. If you want to persuade someone to act, massive statistics create paralysis. A single narrative creates agency.
So if narrative and emotion are the necessary fuel for persuasion, let's explore the dark side of that dynamic. What happens when we try to brute force a change of mind?
Oh boy.
Right, like when we encounter someone who holds a deeply incorrect belief, and we decide, I'm going to skip the story, I'm going to skip the emotional resonance, and I'm just going to drop a mountain of undeniable contradictory evidence right on their lap. Because historically, that approach doesn't just result in a stalemate, it actually backfires spectacularly.
It does. We are talking about identity protective cognition, often referred to in behavioral psychology as the backfire effect. It is one of the most sobering and frustrating realities of human psychology. The backfire effect occurs when you confront someone with definitive factual evidence that contradicts a deeply held belief. And instead of updating their worldview to accommodate the new facts, they dig their heels in and emerge from the conversation even more absolutely certain of their original incorrect position.
We see this constantly. You can show someone a video recording, a peer-reviewed academic study, a signed confession like the ultimate proof that their position is factually wrong.
The smoking gun.
Exactly. And you expect them to say, wow, I was unaware of that data. Thank you for correcting me.
Which never happens.
Never. Instead, they instantly pivot to attacking the methodology of the study, questioning the motives of the person who filmed the video, or entirely moving the goalposts.
Yeah.
What is happening in the brain to cause such a severe rejection of reality?
It comes down to how our brain classifies and responds to threats. Not all beliefs are created equal. We have surface-level beliefs like, I believe it will rain tomorrow, and if you show me a radar map proving it will be sunny, I easily discard my belief.
Sure, because it doesn't define who you are.
Exactly, but then we have core beliefs. These are beliefs deeply intertwined with our identity, our political affiliation, our religious faith, our professional expertise, or our family values.
The big stuff.
Right. When you present contradictory evidence against a core belief, the brain does not process it as a simple data correction. The amygdala activates, and the brain processes that contradictory information as a literal physical threat to your survival.
Wow. It's like trying to run an unauthorized script on a computer, and the brain's firewall instantly recognizes it as malware and quarantines it.
Yes.
The person isn't even consciously choosing to be stubborn. Their neurological defense systems have hijacked their critical thinking.
That firewall analogy is perfect. The moment that threat response is triggered, the person's cognitive resources are entirely diverted toward defense. They are no longer listening to understand. They are listening solely to dismantle.
Right, they're just looking for holes.
They aggressively marshal counterarguments. They seek out any minor flaw in your presentation. And because they just expend an immense mental energy successfully defending their core identity from your attack, they genuinely feel that their original belief is stronger than ever.
Which perfectly encapsulates almost every political debate on the internet. Two people throw competing statistics at each other, the firewalls go up, and both people log off completely convinced that the other person is hopelessly ignorant.
Every single time.
So if pure evidence triggers the firewall, how do we successfully bypass it? We have a few heavily researched workarounds for this, and the first one relies on a concept called finding the shared value.
Right. To bypass the firewall, you have to fundamentally change the point of entry. You cannot demand that the other person adopt your underlying values in order to accept your argument. You have to demonstrate how your argument actually fulfills their pre-existing values.
A phenomenal example of this is the discourse surrounding climate change and environmental policy. If you are trying to persuade a deeply conservative demographic to support a transition to renewable energy, and you frame your entire argument around protecting the environment or saving the earth, you are going to immediately hit a wall.
Instantly.
Because that specific environmental framing is culturally coded to a liberal political identity. So the conservative listener's firewall instantly goes up. The evidence is rejected before it is even processed.
Right.
But if you take the exact same policy proposal with the exact same underlying science, and you change the framing to emphasize economic independence, technological innovation, or national security values that are deeply central to their identity, you suddenly gain access. You didn't change the data, you simply changed the entry code.
It requires immense cognitive empathy. You have to pause and ask yourself, am I trying to win an argument and prove my moral superiority, or am I actually trying to change their mind? Because if your goal is truly to change their mind, you must be willing to speak their value language.
Which ties perfectly into the second workaround, motivational interviewing. I find this absolutely fascinating because it didn't originate in a debate club or a boardroom. It was developed in the trenches of clinical psychology to treat severe addiction.
Exactly. Clinical psychologists working with alcoholism and substance abuse realized very quickly that simply telling a patient, your drinking is destroying your liver and ruining your family, you need to stop, was entirely ineffective.
Right. Telling someone what to do rarely works.
It triggered what psychologists call the writing reflex in the doctor, the urge to jump in and fix the problem with logic, which immediately provoked defensive resistance in the patient.
The firewall goes up.
Exactly. So they developed motivational interviewing. Instead of the practitioner providing the reasons for change, the practitioner uses highly specific, evocative questions to guide the patient into articulating their own reasons for wanting to change.
Because of cognitive dissonance, right. If I sit here and lecture you about why you need to alter your behavior, your ego naturally wants to push back and defend your autonomy.
Right. Nobody wants to be lectured.
But if I ask you open-ended questions about your goals, your frustrations, and your values, and you eventually say out loud, I think my behavior is getting in the way of what I want, you can't argue with yourself. The argument is coming from inside the house.
Self-persuasion is infinitely more durable than external persuasion. When a person hears their own voice articulating the logic for a new belief or behavior, the resistance evaporates. They take ownership of the conclusion because they feel they constructed it themselves. Your job is simply to provide the scaffolding for them to build it.
Wow. Okay, the third workaround to the backfire effect is arguably the most counterintuitive. It's called the two-sided message. This involves actively acknowledging and validating the strongest counterargument against your own position before you make your primary case. Now, I have to play devil's advocate here. If I am trying to convince a board of directors to adopt my strategy, why on earth would I spend the first 5 minutes of my presentation highlighting the biggest risks and flaws in my plan? Doesn't that just hand my critics free ammunition and make me look incredibly weak?
It feels incredibly dangerous, which is why most people default to a heavily sanitized, one-sided presentation. But the research strongly dictates otherwise, particularly when you are dealing with an intelligent, highly skeptical audience.
Okay, so it depends on the audience.
Exactly. If you stand up and only present the sunny, optimistic data, your skeptical audience is not actually listening to your words. They are sitting there thinking, okay, but what about the supply chain issues? What about the competitor's new product? They are actively building their firewall while you are speaking.
They are looking for the catch.
Right. But if you walk into the room and immediately say, before I outline the benefits of this strategy, I want to explicitly address the very real concerns regarding our supply chain vulnerabilities, because that is the most significant hurdle we face. You completely disarm their defensive posture.
See, because you named it.
You signal profound intellectual honesty. You demonstrate that you have surveyed the entire landscape, including the hazards. By articulating their internal objections better than they could themselves, you do their defensive work for them. They can mentally relax, drop the firewall, and actually listen to how you plan to solve the problem.
That is a masterclass in situational awareness. So we've explored how to navigate around the brain's defensive tripwires. Let's pivot to the positive architecture.
Let's do it.
If we know what causes a person to defensively reject an idea, what are the specific psychological mechanisms that naturally, almost involuntarily, trigger a human being to say yes?
Ah, the fun stuff.
Right. To answer that, we have to look at the foundational text of modern influence, the framework developed by Dr. Robert Cialdini.
Robert Cialdini's work is inescapable in this field. He is a social psychologist who essentially went undercover for years.
Really? Like a spy?
Sort of. He infiltrated car dealerships, telemarketing firms, and fundraising organizations to observe what the most successful persuaders actually did in the real world. He distilled his findings into 6 universal principles of influence.
Okay.
And what makes these principles so immensely powerful is that they are not cheap linguistic tricks. They are deeply rooted in human evolutionary biology. They are cognitive heuristics, shortcuts our brains use to navigate a highly complex world efficiently.
Let's really dig into the mechanics of each of these, starting with principle 1, reciprocity. This is the ingrained psychological compulsion to return favors. If someone gives us something, we feel a profound, sometimes uncomfortable urge to repay the debt.
Yes.
And we're not just talking about social politeness. This is fundamental to how humanity survived.
Reciprocity is the bedrock of societal cooperation. Evolutionary biologists refer to it as reciprocal altruism. For early humans, food supplies were incredibly volatile. If I had a successful hunt today and shared my surplus meat with you, I needed a biological guarantee that when I inevitably failed to find food next week, you would share your surplus with me.
Right.
Without that deeply felt mutual obligation, early human communities would have fractured and starved. We are hardwired to view unpaid debts as a severe social liability.
It functions like a law of social physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. In the modern world, this dynamic is exploited everywhere. It's the reason charities send you return address labels in the mail when asking for a donation.
Exactly.
The labels cost them pennies, but the moment you accept that unsolicited gift, an asymmetrical sense of obligation is created. You feel guilty throwing the letter away without sending $10 back.
It works incredibly well.
And in a corporate environment, this is why the smartest consultants will offer a free, highly valuable audit of your business before ever mentioning a contract. By giving you immense upfront value, they trigger that deep evolutionary reflex. You fundamentally want to balance the ledger.
Which naturally flows into principle 2, commitment and consistency. Humans possess an overwhelming psychological need for our beliefs, our statements, and our actions to remain aligned over time. When we act inconsistently, we experience cognitive dissonance, a state of mental discomfort that we will go to great lengths to resolve.
This is the engine behind the classic foot-in-the-door technique, isn't it?
It is.
There's a famous behavioral experiment by Friedman and Fraser in the 1960s that illustrated this perfectly. They went to a neighborhood and asked homeowners to put a massive, incredibly ugly, drive carefully billboard in their front yards.
And nobody wants that.
Unsurprisingly, almost everyone refused. But in a different neighborhood, they started smaller. They asked homeowners to display a tiny 3-inch sticker in their window, supporting safe driving. It was such a minor request that almost everyone agreed.
Right.
A few weeks later, they returned to those same homes and asked for the massive, ugly billboard. The compliance rate skyrocketed.
Because the homeowners had already publicly committed to an identity. By placing the small sticker, they subconsciously told themselves, I am the type of citizen who actively cares about neighborhood safety.
They didn't want to be hypocrites.
Exactly. When the larger request arrived, refusing it would mean violating their newly established self-image. It would create cognitive dissonance. Ethical persuasion utilizes this by helping people articulate what they genuinely value and then simply illuminating how your proposal is the most logical, consistent extension of those values.
Principle 3 is social proof. This is the cognitive shortcut where, in moments of ambiguity or uncertainty, we look to the behavior of the crowd to determine the correct course of action.
And we often malign this as mindless herd mentality, but in reality, it is a highly efficient heuristic. We live in an information-dense world. We simply do not have the cognitive bandwidth to thoroughly analyze every single choice we make. If you are in a foreign city and see two restaurants, one is completely empty and the other has a line out the door, your brain instantly uses the crowd as an information cascade. The crowd has already done the analytical work. The food there is safe and good.
But the key differentiator with social proof is a concept called peer proof. We don't just blindly follow any crowd. We follow crowds that look like us.
That's a huge distinction.
Right. If a 60-year-old Olympic athlete tells a 30-year-old office worker that a specific diet works, the office worker might be intrigued, but they likely won't act because the contexts are too different. But if the office worker's colleague, someone the exact same age, with the exact same sedentary lifestyle says, "I tried this diet and it changed my life," the persuasive impact is magnified tenfold. We look to our peers to validate the feasibility of an action.
That distinction is vital, and it serves as a fascinating counterweight to Principle 4, authority. While we rely on peers for feasibility, our brains are also wired to defer to recognized experts in domains where we lack competence. We transition from systematic processing, where we carefully evaluate the arguments, to heuristic processing, where we simply trust the source.
Which is incredibly efficient. If I am on an airplane experiencing severe turbulence, I am not asking the passengers to take a vote on the optimal altitude.
No, please don't.
I'm deferring entirely to the authority of the pilot. But the vulnerability here is that our brains are incredibly lazy, and we frequently substitute the appearance of authority for actual verified expertise.
This is a massive vulnerability. We are deeply susceptible to the trappings of authority titles, uniforms, sophisticated vocabulary, and mere unearned confidence.
All the confidence.
Right. We have all seen television commercials where an actor wearing a white lab coat enthusiastically recommends a brand of toothpaste. Consciously, we know it is a paid actor on a soundstage, but subconsciously, the visual cue of the white coat triggers the heuristic shortcut. This is a doctor. Doctors understand health. I should listen.
Even though we know better.
Exactly. Establishing genuine authority by demonstrating actual competence and citing rigorous evidence is paramount. Relying solely on the superficial cues leans dangerously toward manipulation.
Okay, principle 5 is almost embarrassingly simple. Liking. We are significantly more likely to be persuaded by someone we genuinely like. It sounds obvious, but the biological reality of how it alters our reception of an argument is profound.
It relates heavily to the halo effect. When we possess a positive impression of someone, whether because they were physically attractive, charismatic, or simply familiar to us, our brain automatically assumes that their ideas, their intellect, and their proposals are equally positive.
There is also the mechanism of implicit egotism. We like people who share similarities with us, even entirely superficial ones.
Like wearing the same sports team's hat.
Exactly. If you discover that a stranger happens to share your exact birthday, or grew up in the same obscure hometown, your brain instantly drops its defensive posture. You feel an unearned rapport.
You do.
The practical takeaway here is that persuasion does not begin when you present your first slide. Persuasion begins the moment you interact with the person. If you dive straight into a highly contentious debate without first establishing a baseline of human rapport, your logical arguments are fighting a massive, uphill neurobiological battle.
That is so true. Finally, we arrive at Principle 6, scarcity. The perception that an item, an opportunity, or a piece of information is rare, limited, or decreasing in availability drastically inflates its perceived value.
Why is this trigger so overwhelmingly powerful? I can be completely ambivalent about purchasing a new software tool for my business, but the moment the vendor tells me we are closing onboarding to new clients on Friday, I suddenly feel a desperate, visceral need to sign the contract.
You're experiencing psychological reactance mixed with loss aversion. When an option becomes scarce, we feel our freedom of choice actively shrinking. Humans despise losing autonomy.
We hate being told what we can't do.
Right. Furthermore, the pain of losing an opportunity is processed far more intensely by the brain than the pleasure of gaining that exact same opportunity. The fear of missing out overrides the analytical evaluation of whether you actually need the item.
FOMO is real.
Very real. And once again, there is an ethical line here. Illuminating genuine factual scarcity is providing critical context. Manufacturing artificial scarcity like a digital product that features a fake, perpetually resetting countdown timer is pure coercion.
I hate those fake timers. So synthesizing all of this, we know that people look for authority, they look for similarity, and they look for social proof. This brings us to a really crucial pivot in our understanding of influence. We have to acknowledge that the identity of the person delivering the message is often vastly more important than the empirical quality of the message itself.
It's hard to accept, but yes.
The messenger is the message.
It is arguably the hardest truth for highly analytical, data-driven people to accept. You can spend weeks crafting an impenetrable, logically flawless argument, but the audience will always evaluate the source of the claim before they dedicate a single calorie of brain power to evaluating the claim itself.
Right.
And the most dominant filter they use to evaluate the source is the dynamic between the in-group and the out-group.
Social identity theory is everything here. Let's look at a concrete example. Imagine a highly progressive liberal politician walking into a town hall in a deeply conservative rural district.
Yeah, picturing it.
They step up to the podium and deliver a brilliant, meticulously researched, data-heavy argument regarding the economic benefits of a new healthcare policy. No matter how perfect the logic is, it will likely be entirely rejected by the audience.
Almost certainly.
But if a trusted, deeply conservative local leader steps up to that exact same podium, reads the exact same script word for word, and presents the exact same data, the audience will suddenly find the argument incredibly compelling.
Because the argument itself wasn't the actual obstacle. The obstacle was the social and tribal cost of accepting the argument.
Right.
For the conservative audience to agree with the liberal politician, they would have to mentally align themselves with their perceived ideological adversaries. Doing so threatens their standing within their own in-group. It triggers that identity protective cognition we discussed earlier.
Exactly.
Exactly. But when their own in-group leader presents the data, the tribal threat is neutralized. Accepting the argument is now socially safe.
It's all about reducing the friction of agreement. But there is a massive, fascinating loophole to this in-group dynamic. It happens when someone utilizes what researchers call the unexpected advocate.
Oh, the unexpected advocate is one of the most potent weapons in persuasion. It involves a person passionately arguing for a position that appears to be directly opposed to their own clear self-interest.
Because we naturally operate with a high degree of cynicism regarding people's motives, right?
We do.
If the CEO of a major corporation goes on television and argues that corporate tax rates need to be slashed to stimulate the economy, our brain immediately discounts the argument. We apply attribution theory. We attribute their argument purely to strategic self-interest. We think, of course you believe that. It's going to make you richer.
Right. The argument possesses zero persuasive weight because the motive is obvious. But consider the inverse.
Or when a career executive at a fossil fuel conglomerate publicly resigns and states that the industry must be dismantled to prevent ecological collapse.
Yes.
Our brains completely short-circuit. The natural cynicism fails to deploy. Because we instantly calculate the social and financial risk they are taking, we recognize that they are actively harming their own standing.
They're taking a hit.
Right. Therefore, the brain concludes they cannot possibly be operating from a place of strategic manipulation. They must possess a profound, undeniable, evidence-based conviction to take such a personal hit. By arguing against their own interests, they instantaneously purchase an immense amount of unassailable credibility.
It forces the audience to stop evaluating the person's motives and actually confront the substance of their argument.
It's a brilliant cheat code.
It really is. Now, if the identity of the messenger dictates how the audience filters the information, the specific linguistic packaging of the information dictates the final decision. The exact same mathematical facts can generate completely opposing behaviors depending entirely on the framing.
Framing is the most pervasive, invisible force in daily communication. To truly grasp its power, we have to look at the foundational work of Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman.
Absolute legends in behavioral economics.
They were the pioneers, yeah. And their famous Asian disease problem experiment perfectly illustrates how fragile human logic actually is.
Let's delve deeply into the architecture of this experiment because it's so revealing. Tversky and Kahneman presented participants with a hypothetical crisis, they were told. Imagine that the United States is preparing for the outbreak of an unusual Asian disease, which is expected to kill 600 people. Two alternative programs to combat the disease have been proposed.
Okay, and in the first variation of the experiment, the researchers presented the solutions framed entirely around the concept of gains, specifically lives saved.
Right, positive framing.
They told the participants, if Program A is adopted, 200 people will be saved definitively. If Program B is adopted, there is a 1/3 probability that all 600 people will be saved, and a 2/3 probability that no people will be saved.
And faced with those options, 72% of the participants chose Program A. They overwhelmingly preferred the guaranteed, sure thing. They've locked in the 200, saved lives, and refused to gamble.
Makes sense. But then, the researchers went to a second group of participants and presented the exact same crisis. However, they shifted the reference point. They framed the outcomes entirely around losses. Specifically, lives lost.
The negative frame.
Right, they told this group, if Program A is adopted, 400 people will die definitively. If Program B is adopted, there is a 1/3 probability that nobody will die, and a 2/3 probability that 600 people will die.
And in the second group, the results violently inverted. Only 22% chose Program A. The vast majority, 78%, chose to gamble on Program B.
This is what makes it so mind-bending to me. The mathematics of both scenarios are absolutely identical. Saving 200 out of 600 people mathematically dictates that 400 people die. Program A is the exact same outcome in both scenarios.
Literally the exact same.
Program B is the exact same statistical gamble in both scenarios. Yet, simply changing the words from saved to die completely reversed the behavior of the majority.
This is the crux of prospect theory. It proves that human beings do not evaluate decisions based on absolute outcomes. We evaluate decisions based on relative gains and losses from a specific reference point.
Right.
And crucially, we are fundamentally asymmetric in how we process risk. When options are framed as gains, we become highly risk-averse. We want to secure the win.
Or take the sure thing.
Exactly. But when options are framed as guaranteed losses, the emotional pain of loss aversion kicks in, and we become highly risk-seeking. We will roll the dice on a terrible gamble just to hold on to the tiny hope of avoiding the loss entirely.
The real-world implications of this are staggering. Think about a physician speaking to a patient. If the doctor says, this surgical procedure has a 90% survival rate, the patient focuses on the gain, feels secure, and consents to the surgery.
They feel safe.
But if the doctor says, this surgical procedure has a 10% mortality rate, the patient focuses on the loss, panics, and refuses the life-saving care. Same math, different reality.
It happens every day.
Or consider political policy. If a government proposes a carbon tax and frames it as a cost to businesses, the public rejects it due to loss aversion. If they frame it as an investment in future energy security, it becomes palatable.
Frame is everything.
But, I frequently find myself wrestling with a philosophical question here. If changing a few words can so drastically alter a person's free will, isn't framing inherently manipulative? It feels deceptive. It feels as though we are obscuring the objective truth to engineer a preferred outcome.
It is a valid philosophical concern. I completely get that. But it bumps up against the inescapable reality of language. There is no such thing as an unframed message.
Really? None.
Complete objectivity is a myth. The moment you choose specific words to convey a fact, you are establishing a frame. Even if you simply drop a raw spreadsheet on a table, the metrics you chose to include in the columns constitute a frame.
Oh, that's true. You chose what to measure.
Exactly. Therefore, the goal isn't to somehow escape framing. The goal is to be highly deliberate and ethical about it. If you understand that framing a surgery around mortality rates will trigger irrational panic that prevents a patient from making the best medical choice for their survival, you could strongly argue that it is your ethical duty to frame the statistics around survival rates.
So you're helping them make the choice they actually want.
You are lying. You are ensuring the data is received in a way that aligns with the patient's ultimate goal.
That is a crucial paradigm shift. So we are swimming in an ocean of invisible influence. From social proof and manufactured scarcity to identity protective cognition and loss aversion framing, our brains are constantly being tugged in 1,000 different directions.
Every single day.
How do we build resilience against this? How do you, the person listening right now, defend your cognitive sovereignty against individuals who are actively trying to manipulate you?
The most robust defense mechanism we have discovered is a psychological framework known as inoculation theory. This has been heavily advanced by researchers like Sander van der Linden at Cambridge University.
Inoculation, like a vaccine.
Exactly. And the underlying mechanism is beautiful, elegant, because it maps perfectly onto how a biological vaccine operates within the human body.
Let's trace that metaphor. When you receive a medical vaccine, you are not being injected with a cure. You are being injected with a severely weakened, neutralized version of a virus.
Right.
Your biological immune system detects the weakened threat, analyzes it, and produces specific antibodies to destroy it. Because your body has practiced defeating the weakened virus, when you encounter the live, highly infectious virus in the real world weeks later, your immune system instantly recognizes it and neutralizes it before it can take hold.
Psychological inoculation, which is often referred to as pre-bunking, works in the exact same manner for our cognitive immune system.
Pre-bunking, that's a great term.
Isn't it? You cannot protect someone from manipulation by simply telling them to think critically. That's too vague. You have to expose them to a weakened version of the manipulative tactic, explicitly label the technique being used, and allow them to logically dismantle it in a safe environment.
So, simply by listening to this deep dive, you are actively inoculating your mind. Now that you understand the mechanics of manufactured scarcity, the next time you are on a questionable e-commerce website and you see a red countdown timer claiming the sale ends in 2 minutes, your brain won't trigger a panic response.
No, it'll trigger an eye roll.
Exactly. Your cognitive antibodies will deploy. You will recognize the tactic, label it as manipulation, and entirely diffuse its power.
Once you understand the architecture of the illusion, the magician loses his power over you. Exposing the mechanics of manipulation is the ultimate cognitive defense.
We have covered an immense amount of theoretical ground today, from the neurobiology of Damasio's somatic markers to the evolutionary biology of reciprocal altruism and the behavioral economics of prospect theory. Let's ground this.
Let's make it practical.
How does the listener take these profound psychological realities and apply them to their practical professional life tomorrow morning?
Let's begin with high-stakes presentations. The most frequent failure in corporate communication is over-relying on the logical steering wheel while ignoring the emotional engine.
Bringing just the spreadsheets.
Right. If you are pitching a new initiative, do not simply present a sequence of data slides. You must interweave Aristotle's triad. Establish your ethos by acknowledging the risks up front, using the two-sided message to build massive credibility.
Disarm them early.
Engage their pathos through narrative transportation. Tell the story of the one specific client whose life is complicated by the current problem, avoiding psychophysical numbing. Only then do you deploy your logos, using the data to prove that the solution scales. Emotion motivates the decision. Logic justifies it to the board.
That's powerful. What about the granular tactics of negotiation? This is where Cialdini's heuristics become incredibly practical, right?
Oh, absolutely. If you are entering a tense negotiation, understand the power of reciprocity. Do not hoard every concession.
Give a little to get a little.
Proactively offer a small but meaningful concession early in the process. It doesn't project weakness. It triggers an evolutionary compulsion in the other party to balance the ledger by conceding something in return.
And what about the commitment principle?
Utilize it. Do not start by arguing over the most contentious issue. Get them to agree to a minor procedural detail first. Once their brain begins to establish a pattern of saying yes, the cognitive friction of continuing to agree drops significantly.
In daily written communication emails, proposals, internal memos, the framing is vital. Stop assuming that laying out the facts will speak for itself. Anticipate the reader's resistance. Use the two-sided message.
Yes, write it out.
In the second paragraph of your proposal, explicitly state, I recognize that implementing this will require a temporary reallocation of resources, which is a significant hurdle. Address the elephant in the room before they have the chance to use it against you.
It's so disarming when you do that. And always be mindful of whether you are framing outcomes as gains to play it safe or framing them as losses to agitate for urgent change.
Finally, in your everyday face-to-face conversations, whether you are attempting to persuade a skeptical colleague or navigate a disagreement with your manager, remember the in-group dynamics and the principle of liking.
You can't just be a logic robot.
No, if you walk into a conversation treating the other person purely as an obstacle to be overcome with superior logic, their firewall will instantly deploy. You must establish a baseline of similarity and rapport. Genuinely listening to their concerns and finding a shared value is not a pleasantry. It is a neurological requirement for persuasion to occur.
The ultimate takeaway is that you must respect the biological hardware you are interfacing with. The person sitting across from you is not a logic processing algorithm.
Not at all.
They are a complex, emotionally driven human being whose brain is constantly scanning for threats, seeking social validation, and trying to avoid loss. Empathy is not a soft skill. It is the fundamental prerequisite for effective influence.
I couldn't agree more. We started this journey looking at the frustration of losing an argument despite holding a royal flush of facts. And what we have uncovered is that influence isn't about blunt force trauma. It isn't about verbally bludgeoning someone into submission with empirical data.
That just builds walls.
It is a nuanced dance of framing, emotional resonance, cognitive empathy, and profound intellectual honesty. It requires you to stop polishing the steering wheel and start tending to the engine.
It demands a complete paradigm shift in how we approach human interaction. And, it leaves us with a deeply introspective challenge regarding our own cognitive blind spots.
Oh, definitely.
We have established through neuroscience and behavioral economics that human beings overwhelmingly utilize logic to retroactively justify decisions that their subconscious has already made on an emotional basis.
So we want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. I want you to turn the lens inward. Examine the architecture of your own life.
This is the hard part.
It is. Think about your most deeply held convictions, perhaps regarding your political ideology, your career trajectory, or your fundamental worldview. What is a core belief you hold right now that you are absolutely convinced is built upon a foundation of pure, unassailable objective logic, but upon closer inspection might actually just be an incredibly well-justified emotion?
Because the moment you can identify the emotional engine driving your own beliefs, you are finally equipped to take the wheel.